Good evening, everybody. We're happy to have everybody here. I'm Fran DeGast. I'm the King Lion, or King Lioness, if you will. Tonight we have 5 contestants for our Speakout contest. The theme is how can we save our environment? Now, the speeches will be 5 to 7 minutes in length. The judges will consider quality, significance of content, together with clarity and effectiveness of delivery. Each judge may ask a question of each speaker. First prize is $250, second prize is $150, and third prize is $100. Now, this is a part of a 2-level statewide Lions Club competition. Our winners will be eligible to participate in round 2 on Saturday, May the 4th at the Fireside Inn and Suites in West Lebanon. Last year it was in Manchester, Vermont, so it's a lot more convenient. Okay, so we're going to select the contestants to come up one at a time.
Yep.
Good luck to everybody.
Okay, my name is David Lamal, and I'm delighted to have the privilege of being able to introduce you speakers tonight. On this theme that we'll be addressing, how can we save our environment? And let me start by saying a little bit about the game plan for the evening. I'm going to be introducing speakers who've been placed in a random order of presentation. And after each speech, there'll be an opportunity for the judges to ask questions. Not the audience, but the judges can, if they choose to. And then after the last speech, the judges will deliberate in an adjacent room. And while they're doing that, we're going to have an informal, no pressure discussion period with the audience. And that'll be the time that the audience gets a chance to ask questions. And I hope that you'll have lots of them. And so we can have a rousing discussion while the judges are doing the hard work. So, well, and then after they return, we'll have an award ceremony, and that'll be pretty much it for the evening. So, to get started here, I want to introduce the judges, because after all, they're the people that do the heavy lifting here, the most important job of the contest. And so our judges are Gary DaCosta. Gary, would you stand so people can see who you are? There he is. And Steve Flanders. There he is. And Peter Stansel.
I'm in the middle.
Hey, okay. So this way the speakers have to project everywhere in the room. Okay? So I guess without any further ado, we ought to get this thing going. And so our first speaker is going to be Oliver Benedict, who, as you just learned, was a sophomore at Hanover High School. And his topic will be taking a second look at single-use plastics. Oliver, take it away.
A straw with our iced coffee, a plastic bag to carry our groceries, a bottle of water at a town picnic. Taken individually, each seems harmless. These modern conveniences are so ubiquitous and so quickly thrown out that they hardly register in our minds. But single-use plastics come with a steep environmental price, one that we'll be paying off for a millennia. Our plastic addiction is having a devastating impact on our oceans, our wildlife, and our health. But would a ban be the best solution? In my speech today, I'll be taking a second look at single-use plastics, both the bad and the good, to figure out if a ban is the answer. Single-use plastics are a staple of our country's throwaway culture. Our reliance on these plastics means we are accumulating waste at a staggering rate. According to the United Nations Environmental Program, we produce 300 million tons of plastic each year, nationwide. half of which is for single-use items. That's nearly equivalent to the weight of half of the entire human population. Single-use plastics are ravaging our environments. They are polluting our oceans and waterways. They are killing wildlife and food chains. They are depleting our natural resources, and they are accumulating in landfills, and they are exacerbating climate change. The most effective way to deal with this dangerous assault on our planet is to simply ban single-use plastics. Banning single-use plastics will restrict demand, production, and eventually the devastating disposal of plastics into our damaged planet. According to the environmental management company, the Vanilla Group, plastics make up 80% of all marine debris, and the Great Pacific Garbage Patch alone contains over 87,000 tons of plastic debris. Most importantly, the usage of single-use plastics is a major driver in the warming of our planet. 99% of plastics are derived from fossil fuels, and when these plastics are discarded, they decompose slowly while releasing methane, a potent greenhouse gas. Not only are we killing our planet with these plastics, but we are also killing ourselves. Microplastics have been found in the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. And a recent study estimates that humans could be ingesting up to a credit card's worth of microplastics every week. These plastics contain additives and chemicals that have been found to interfere with brain development, disrupt the hormone system, and contain chemicals that can cause birth defects and cancer. These plastics hurt people, and they hurt people who can't do anything about it the most. Even if plastic doesn't end up in the ocean, recycled plastic is often exported from high-income countries to developing countries to process until they are drowning under thousands of tons of plastic garbage. This is the case in Southeast Asia, which has begun to import much of plastic from recycling. When plastic is incinerated, toxic fumes quickly become a hazard for residents' health, leading to everything from skin rashes to cancer. The worst effects are pushed back onto overburdened communities like these that have the fewest resources to fight back. In February 2022, Oceana released a nationwide poll revealing that most Republican and Democratic voters are concerned about single-use plastics and support policies to reduce them. A resounding 80% of all Americans support a single-use plastic ban. A staggering result, especially considering that there is almost nothing in this country today that 4/5 of all Americans can agree on. However, although it may seem obvious to reduce single-use plastics, there are actually several key facts you need to know before you support a nationwide ban on plastics. 1. It might be more environmentally harmful to ban single-use plastics. Plastics are better for the environment than other alternatives because they are more efficient and use less energy during production and transport. Banned single-use plastics will be replaced with glass and metal and bioplastics, all of which are worse for the environment in both carbon emissions and for consumers. These alternatives all have far greater emissions, both during production and during transport, as they are heavier than plastics, writes Norman Miller from the University of Illinois. Yunhai Song, a product engineer, found that, quote, reusable bags are usually made from cotton, which requires not only abundant water, but also more energy to produce, meaning higher carbon dioxide emissions. A cotton bag needs to be reused 131 times to equal the carbon benefits that it gains versus a plastic bag. 2. The numerous negative economic impacts that this ban would have on hardworking Americans who are already struggling in this economy is not to be overlooked. Approximately 30,000 people work at plastic recycling and manufacturing plants across America. By killing these jobs, we would be hurting the middle and lower class. Banning single-use plastics would place an environmental agenda above people's livelihoods. And did you know that after San Francisco banned plastic bags, the documented cases of E. coli-related ER visits went up by about 1/4? Or after governments banned plastic bags in Palo Alto, Malibu, and Fairfax, there was a 46% increase in deaths from foodborne illnesses. Those statistics do not lie, and they help paint a picture of what a world without plastics might look like. It's possible that today is not the first time you've seen me speak publicly about single-use plastics. In the 5th grade, I broke my arm at a trampoline park. I missed the ski season, and I had to spend recesses indoors with my favorite social studies teacher, Mr. Fenton. Over the course of those indoor winter recesses, I helped him spearhead a ban on single-use plastics for the whole town of Norwich, Vermont. Myself and other 5th graders spoke at several select board meetings about the dangers of single-use plastics. And in April 2019, the select board voted to ban all single-use plastics at town businesses. In July of that same year, Vermont passed a statewide ban on single-use plastic bags. Now, here I am, 5 years later, with 2 working arms, and the path forward for our country's connection to plastics is not as clear to me. With all that I've learned, here's what I would suggest we do in order to answer the question, how can we save our environment? We should make companies more accountable for their waste before making individuals responsible for their use. If U.S. companies reduce single-use plastics, specifically the food, beverage sector, as well as fashion, cosmetic, and toy productions, it would make nationwide accountability more direct. Putting the onus on big businesses through governmental regulation to reduce plastics would also fund lower cost and EPA-friendly alternatives. And finally, where I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Fenton, educate, educate, educate. Teaching the public about how long it takes for plastics to break down and the implications it has for others, in addition to the dangers that these alternatives have, is the best plan of action in my eyes. Thank you.
Any questions from the judges?
Yes, Oliver, thank you for a great presentation. Could you tell us what your most significant sources of information were?
Oh yeah, I can grab. I had a few from the United Nations that I thought were really interesting. So the United Nations Environmental Program is where I came up with the 300 million tons of plastic each year. So I thought that one was very significant. And then I talked about another study done by the University of Illinois that looked into those alternatives and the impacts they would actually have. So I'd say those are my 2 most important.
Anybody else? Peter?
I have a couple of questions. One of them is the biodegradability of plastics. What progress is being made in making these plastics that have such a long survival rate when they're thrown away, potentially just become a very quickly biodegradable substance?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that at one point that they were making these more biodegradable alternatives, but currently with the majority of plastics that are being manufactured and all the vast majority of all plastics that are currently in our oceans and like in our environment, they are not biodegradable, but the alternatives that are being made are being made with less fossil fuel based, and so that they're able to decompose and don't have the need of being incinerated, which releases more gases into the environment.
Do you know what percentage of single-use plastics is being recycled right now?
I do not have it on hand, no. I think that is another big issue, that even if many are recyclable, the majority of people do not recycle them, but I don't have that statistic on hand.
Thank you, Oliver. Okay, our second speaker is Lily Weinstein-Terry, who's a senior at Hanover High School, and she'll be talking about implementing climate-focused policy. Good.
Hi, I'm here to speak to you today about the role that effective climate policy can play in creating a sustainable future. I first became aware of the impacts that global warming is having on our planet in elementary school, and since then, little has changed. I've watched firsthand the irreversible changes to the Vermont climate. 5 years ago, the mild winter we've experienced this year would be unheard of. Now it's almost expected. I used to be so excited to go ice skating with my dad each winter at Lake Maury. I would wait in anticipation for the day that the trails were finally plowed, and I would be eager for a chance to lace up my ice skates and see if I could beat my record for miles skated the previous winter. We're now at a point where the ice doesn't freeze until February, and the number of skatable days has decreased considerably. We've passed what scientists have called the point of no return. The petroleum giants responsible for the majority of this damage have sat back and watched as the warnings, flagged by their scientists as early as the 1970s, have morphed into reality. We'll never be able to bring back the species that we've driven to extinction or make up for the years of inaction. But by enacting aggressive and effective greenhouse gas reduction policies, we can mitigate some of the worst effects of climate change and minimize future damages. We need to mandate the adoption of renewable energy sources, as well as create policies that place responsibility for climate-related damages on fossil fuel companies. One policy that would directly result in emission reduction in Vermont is H289, the Modernized Renewable Energy Standard. Vermont's current renewable energy standard has set some of the least ambitious requirements for renewable energy in New England and is not setting the state up to meet its greenhouse gas reduction goals. The adoption of the Modernized Renewable Energy Standard would increase the amount of green jobs in Vermont, a sector that would bring many people and help support our economy. This bill would also support the state's economy by mandating that 20% of renewable energy consumed in Vermont be produced by in-state production facilities. Right now, much of Vermont's renewable energy is sourced from Hydro-Quebec. This company has flooded large areas of Canadian land in order to produce energy for Vermont consumption. Another large portion of our energy comes from natural gas. This is completely sourced from out-of-state sources, which are largely based in low-income areas. Not only would this policy decrease greenhouse gas emissions, but it would discontinue the shifting of our energy burden onto others. A modernized renewable energy standard is not the only path to a sustainable future. 2024 continues to be a monumental year for climate policy in Vermont. Another path towards achieving this goal of sustainability is through S259, the Climate Superfund Bill. This bill, if passed by the legislature, would set a national precedent. Not only would it provide support for people experiencing climate-related economic distress, but would also source these funds from those who are directly responsible for our current climate crisis, fossil fuel companies. This bill would tax companies that have emitted more than 1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases over the past 30 years. This money would then be used to support the necessary infrastructure upgrades that will be needed in the coming years to support long-term clean energy use, as well as to combat the imminent impacts of climate change. We cannot keep delaying the transition to clean energy and resilient infrastructure. This is a necessary step to decrease our carbon footprint. Passage of effective climate policy provides a direct path forward to achieving this and will ensure that we are able to meet our global emission reduction targets. Thank you.
Steve, I would ask each speaker the same question. Could you highlight what sources informed your topic?
Yes, I would say that my three main sources were Renewable Energy Vermont and their information on the Renewable Energy Standard, VCAN, which is the Vermont Climate Action Network, and their studies on Vermont global warming trends, and then VNRC and VPIRG for the information about the Vermont Climate Superfund. Yes.
Where does Vermont rank right now in terms of its actions on behalf of the...
In New England, we're second to last. And overall, I'm not exactly sure.
Good.
Good evening, Lily. You mentioned two pieces of legislation, H289 and S259.
Yes.
Do you know the status of those bills and the likelihood of their passing?
Yes, they, S259 just passed the Senate actually today. it got voted out of the Senate. And H-289 passed the House last Wednesday. And they both face a very high likelihood of passing the legislature, but are very likely to get vetoed and may not have enough votes to get overridden.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Riley Naylor, who is a junior at Lebanon High School, and her title is A Flight Not Afoot for Our Environment.
When the subject of our environment and the effect that we have upon it comes up, we often delve into it with the lens of individuality. There's a large number of people who are concerned about what we can do as individuals to limit our carbon footprint. In the end, a focal point of change focuses so largely on the effect that driving a car using gas or any other household product has, we can feel drowned about what we have to do despite our circumstances. We try to find ways to mitigate our footprints with unrealistic expectations. We live in a rural area. Vermont and New Hampshire both have around 4.6 million acres of forest, as well as 450,000 acres of farmland. It's almost impossible to live without a car, and many people don't have the ability to afford the environmentally friendly cars created, or at least keep up with them. In that sense, taking a stand on protecting the environment through mitigating individuals is pointless. Unless it's a law, you can't force people to be better. And even if we take a small step, it may only get us so far. Besides, to create something great, we have to make sacrifices, like using materials that aren't necessarily safe to create cars that don't damage our environment, or giving up necessary crops just so that we don't have to use tilling. Asking people to change their lives for the sake of a cause isn't a great motivator, especially when the changes hurt. But what if I told you we could make a single change that wouldn't impact the large amount of the population while making a large impact on the environment? I'm talking about ghost flights. Ghost flights are when airplanes with less than 10% capacity, including workers, make a scheduled flight for a separate destination and are often covering more than 1,000 kilometers per trip. These flights are carried out for a couple of reasons. For example, they allow airlines to keep their spots, which are the rights for an airplane to land and arrive in a specific location within the given destination. These landings can get very competitive, and airlines use ghost flights to make sure that they're guaranteed their spots. They also use this time for training and maintenance. And although being on a flight with nobody else sounds wonderful, the impact it has is jarring. Going back to the car issue, a regular gas-fueled car emits 4.6 tons of carbon dioxide per year. A single ghost flight emits 18 tons. In March of 2020, there were 15,000 ghost flights, creating 2.1 million tons of carbon emissions in the United Kingdom alone. That equates to the yearly average of roughly 1.4 million diesel car emissions. In 2022, there were reports of an expected 100,000 ghost flights. The damage a couple of planes are going through for the main purpose of retaining their parking spot is an unnecessary waste and is butchering our environment. So how did this problem come to be? The airline industry has had many ups and downs through history, though one major event that happened was COVID. Now, ghost flights existed beforehand, but they became a very popular option for airlines during COVID. They used ghost flights to retain relationships and keep up maintenance during a time of restricted flight. Though the main issue is that ghost flights didn't stop after COVID. And they continue to be a problem throughout airline industries. Though currently there is a significant reduction in ghost flights due to a large amount of controversy spilt after 2022. Many foreign countries are starting to reduce their use of ghost flights and are creating policies against them. Though the problem remains completely unresolved. And it is estimated to continue until 2050. For reference, that's years after we've expected to hit the threshold for major environmental damage. So why is this important? Why is the impact of ghost flights so profound? Well, to be honest, it isn't. Not in itself. It's a major problem that happened a while ago, but has since died down a lot. But that's what's incredible. We had a major problem, and policies changed that. We made it grow for the better. And even if the problem isn't solved, we were able to make it less. That change is important, especially when it comes down to our environment. I felt the need to share this story with you about the dangers of flight to lift a small burden, as well as hopefully giving people a goal. We are all in charge of our own lives, and although it is impossible to try and scrutinize that onto other people, these small little changes can help in making a conscious effort to try and contribute to helping this beautiful planet that we live on live and be able to continue is important. We could easily reduce millions of carbon emissions by simply making permanent parking spots for Delta or Ryanair, and that the entire weight of the world, or at least its atmosphere, shouldn't entirely be on the people. Although that doesn't mean that we're helpless against these major corporations. You can stay up to date and be informed and push back against bad systems. And that, I feel, is an obligation as an American citizen. So we can take responsibility and create an environment for change. Thank you.
Searches influence too much in this talk.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Can you tell us where you got the information?
Oh, yeah.
Motivated you.
Of course. So I began looking at the Aviation Environment Federation, which before my research I did not know existed. And on top of that, I looked at other sources, including National Geographic and the New Hampshire Municipal, as well as looking at other outside sources and secondary sources about the problem and how people were reacting firsthand, like CNN, The Independent, and other news reports as well. I also looked at NCESC.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Riley. Okay, our next speaker is Cooper Brunette, who's a junior at Oxbow High School, and his title is Letting Go of What We Love.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak tonight at the Lions Club. I come here today with what I believe is a unique perspective on the climate crisis that our world faces. I myself am a student pilot. What that means is that every Saturday, I make the more than 1 hour drive from my home in East Corinth to the Patrick Leahy Airport in Burlington, Vermont, to do the one thing that I love most, fly. Ever since I was a little boy, I was obsessed with being part of the lucky few who got to taste flight, and as a result, I was willing to do anything in my power to pursue my dreams. Taking flight is likened to taking your first hit of an addictive drug. Pulling back on the yoke and feeling the aircraft react to your movements is intoxicating, and climbing past 5,000 feet is an indescribable high. I wasn't concerned with the consequences, such as having to fill up my tank in my car nearly twice a week. And if you drive a car with a damaged engine and leaky oil, such as myself, that's an unfortunate close to $120 a week down the drain. I wasn't concerned with the cost of flight training either, which, in case you're wondering, it isn't cheap. I wasn't even concerned about how much time I would have to sacrifice for this new profession, but it did not matter, not to me at least, because I was doing the thing I loved most, and nothing was going to stop me from doing that. However, there was always a looming issue in my heart. Aviation as a whole has contributed to more than 5% of all of global warming. While that may not seem so significant at first glance, flying is the most dangerous method of transportation for our environment mile for mile. And if every person in the world just took one flight, one long-haul flight, ocean to ocean, once a year, it would exceed all the United States' combined carbon emissions by 10%. Think about that. In just 1 year, 10% exceeded all of the United States' carbon emissions. The damage that flying causes to the environment is irreparable. And for someone whose entire lifestyle revolves around aviation, that's damaging to my heart. I grew up in Vermont, like all of you I'm assuming, just one of the many states in the United States to be blessed with plentiful nature. And to see that get damaged by carbon emissions hurts me. But when I sat down and asked myself if I was willing to give up flying for the sake of the environment, there was absolutely no way I could bring myself to do that. And that's when I realized the true issue with climate change. Car enthusiasts are in love with the sound of a roaring internal combustion engine and the feeling of driving something so powerful and with so much frosting underneath the hood. Aircraft enthusiasts, such as myself, love the smells, the sights, the sounds that just come with general aviation as a whole. Even boat enthusiasts hold similar things dear to their hearts by being able to glide across the water freely. And that's when I realized, in order to solve the climate change crisis, people will not accept an alternative. They need a replica. While it may seem that this idea of reform only benefits people who are head over heels for a gas-powered machine, it would benefit every single person on the face of the earth. You see, the main issue with climate change is the individual. Most are simply not willing to adapt to a complete lifestyle change to benefit the environment when they can't see that it benefits themselves as well. Just as I'm not going to give up my love for aviation, the average car enthusiast isn't going to give up his love for hearing the rev limiter on his Porsche 911 go off, and the boater isn't going to give up fishing either just because he can't afford an electric motor for his boat. And this brings me to cost. One of the biggest issues with tackling climate change is affordably getting someone into one of the many seats of an electric vehicle. The cheapest electric car nowadays costs upwards of $35,000. And that's just for the basic model meant for city driving, not the challenging environments and back roads that our country is riddled with. And those cars don't even attempt to imitate their gas-powered predecessors. The ones that do, such as the Porsche Taycan, cost upwards of $143,000. And don't even get me started on a plane. You'd be lucky to even sit in one, let alone own close to a $200,000 EDA-40. But it expands so much further than cars and planes. Bikers, ATV riders, people who use a wood-burning stove, and even people who cook on a charcoal grill are not able to afford an alternative. They won't tolerate the alternative either. If people are expected to change their lifestyles to accommodate for a changing climate, their lifestyles should instead change for them. In order to meet this goal, the vehicle and appliance manufacturers of the world must be required under law to begin phasing out the production of gas-powered vehicles and introduce more electric vehicles and appliances. Furthermore, these products need to be accessible to the public and sold at a price similar to their fossil fuel counterparts. But most importantly, these products should have no bounds to safety, no bounds to reliability, and no bounds to fun. As a result, new sustainable vehicles and appliances could be interchangeable with its carbon-emitting predecessors, and humanity as a whole can make an easy, seamless transition into the foreseeable future. If we expect humanity to change its ways for the world, the climate crisis will never be solved. However, if humanity changes for itself, the climate crisis will solve itself, and no one will have to let go of what they love.
So could you
Absolutely. I use multiple sources from the Federal Aviation Administration, the British Broadcasting Corporation, CNN. I use some from the United Nations, some of their studies on the effects of aviation and their damage on the environment. And then I also use websites such as tradeaplane.com and cars.com for finding the prices of vehicles.
Good.
Have you given up flying?
No, sir.
Peter?
I was a little confused by a comment you made earlier, it was probably because I didn't follow it quite right. But you said something that a coast-to-coast flight accounted for something like 10% of total emissions.
Yes. So if every single person in the world just took one flight per year, coast to coast internationally, it would create more than 10% of the United States carbon emissions per year.
So 300 billion coast-to-coast flights would equal 10% of our total emissions?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Cooper.
Thank you.
Our final speaker this evening is also from Oxbow High School, also a junior. This is Libby Swift.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be with you here today. When I'm approached with the question, how do we save our environment? I think about what difference I really, truly can make. Fighting climate change goes deeper than me. The tip of the iceberg has not even been touched. Yes, I recycle, and I never litter. But I'm only 17 years old. In 7 months, I will be able to vote for the first time, and I have no idea what impact that means, if any at all. Now, I do not consider myself a very highly political person. That being said, I have very strong opinions. I have never missed a student council meeting at my small town high school, but when does my vote actually matter? What is a 17-year-old girl driving her parents' car, obsessed with her phone, and an obvious online consumer going to do about carbon emissions? I cannot afford to purchase a $45,000 hybrid vehicle, let alone a $60,000 electric vehicle. There's no way that I myself would be able to afford that. I'm young. All of my savings are going towards a new pair of shoes that are popular online or an unreasonably overpriced drink from Starbucks. I work at a daycare. I play tag with 3-year-olds and I change diapers. There's no way that an environmentally healthy vehicle is within my budget. So, why is the message that my generation is supposed to fix this problem so constant? How are we supposed to reverse hundreds of years of carbon atmospheric pollution? Youth leadership on this issue has been marginalized and denigrated. It has been 3 years since anyone has heard a speech from Greta Thunberg. She became a youth advocate, and then she became a joke. She was called a teenage puppet, or my favorite, Gabby Greta. Yes, she's still active online. She still posts protests on Friday, but is she even remotely effective? Who is listening to her? How is youth today supposed to make a difference if we are not taken seriously? Of course, I ethically would like to pursue a lifestyle where I can buy all organic groceries and I can encourage my peers and my colleagues that heating their homes with oil is not morally sound. Nonetheless, money matters. It is that simple. Organic groceries cost more, solar panels are a huge and costly investment, and heat pumps cost upwards of $10,000, along with the additional maintenance that these appliances that is not normally taken into consideration along installation. Adults need to help create a structure where we can reach this environmental threshold. When the younger generation's income starts to grow, we will then be able to make more environmentally responsible choices. When we gradually inherit the power of the consumer, then we can act in an environmentally sensitive way. We, as a people, cannot put pressure on my generation while we are still young, but our parents and our community can prepare, educate, and encourage us to make sustainable choices when we become contributing members of society. Teach us, and we will respond. In no shape or form am I trying to elude responsibility or avoid doing the part that I and the rest of my generation need to play. I am not happy with the status quo, with forest fires, with flooding, and the polar bears. I even wrote a letter to the Trump administration about the oil drilling in the Arctic Refuge way back in 2020. Those commercials during Wheel of Fortune, they make me cry. Do you guys think Vanna White recycles? Pretty words and overambitious goals are not going to get this done. Trust me, I get it. You guys want me to tell you that we can change the world and stand here to convince you that my generation is willing to take on the responsibility of rescuing our planet from this global crisis. We will, but it won't happen immediately. Change takes time. While we wish we could wave a magic wand and go back in time and slow down climate change, that is not practical. That is wishful thinking at best. We can make changes, yet it will take time and realistic expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
My stall question is, tell us about the sources that from your talk.
A lot of my sources came from like Consumers of America and the labor of this Bureau of Labor Statistics about the average income of like an American. And a lot of my more like social facts came from like this study on Twitter. It's like has a weird name, but I don't have it up here, but those are my main sources.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we're going to let the judges go do their thing. Thank you, Libby. Well, because this audience is clearly interested in the climate change problem, I was contacted by the organizers of the Earth Day EV Expo. It's going to be coming up pretty soon. They asked me to try to promote their event and let you know about it. So this is going to happen on Sunday, the 21st of this month, from 12 to 3 in the parking lot of Shaw's in West Lebanon. So again, it's the Earth Day EV Expo. You're invited to come and see the glories of electric vehicles. What I'd like now to do is to ask all the speakers to stand up in front, facing the audience, and we can start this informal discussion that I mentioned, that I hope lots of people will participate in. And again, you can ask a question of an individual speaker or just address the entire group with your question, but go for it.
Cooper, did you know about ghost flights?
I'm aware of them.
Okay. There was some irony there.
Yes.
I have a question for Oliver. You referenced that the rate of E. coli increased in Malibu, Palo Alto, and another place, San Francisco, when plastic was banned. Was that substantiated with studies? Was this causal?
Yes, so there was...
How was it explained?
Yeah, there was a few studies on that, and the main explanation I saw that made sense to me was just the way that these foods were packaged and like effectively sealed, especially for extended periods of time, was much more effective when done with plastics rather than other ways.
Mm-hmm. And I'd be further interested, not that I expect you to have that available to you now, who conducted these studies. It stands out to me that Malibu and Palo Alto are among the wealthiest communities in the country.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know who conducted studies off the top of my head, but I might be able to get back to you later on.
That's fine. Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question about electric cars and the electric grid. I understand that we have a very sparse electric grid that's on film. We keep producing these electric cars, it's going to destroy our grid. I mean, it's pulling the heart for the carriage, you know, whatever you call it, horse before the carriage. Or
Absolutely, in most of our towns actually, and especially in rural Vermont, actually we don't have the charging capacity to charge some of these electric vehicles, like the new Tesla, so you have to install entire electrical systems just to support the car.
I think the only chargers that are even in our town is at our local Hannaford's, so.
I wasn't talking about charge, I was talking about the grid itself,
Yeah.
you know, where we get our electricity from.
Can add on to that. The grid in Vermont is extremely outdated. It's upwards of, I don't know, it's like needs to be upgraded. And the discussion now is just like the people now are highlighting the need to upgrade it in a way that can support more electricity capacity and will create the capacity for everyone to have an EV if that's something that they would like. And no matter what, the grid will need to be upgraded because even if we don't all adopt EVs, it is not, I don't know, like, yeah. It cannot support the electricity consumption of our state at the moment.
Like even without electric cars?
Yeah.
We're not going back.
It's, yeah.
Other thoughts? Might just put yes.
I have a question for Cooper specifically. The future and or possibility of electric flight and aircraft and aviation, is that even a thing, and is that happening locally in any form?
Oh, absolutely. People up at Beta in Burlington, Vermont, they are focusing on electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. However, I went on a recent job shadow with the people who manage the airport, and I found out that, and this is the case for a lot of companies producing electric vehicles, is that by doing this, they're actually consuming more fossil fuels than people driving regular fossil fuel burning cars would, just in the production of making these aircraft, like at the case in Beta, and then Tesla also has issues with that too. But otherwise, there's a lot of advancements in that field for general aviation. That means private pilots, people who are just flying four-seater planes, little aircraft. In terms of larger commercial aviation, the advancements are slow. Being able to get an electric motor to produce enough power to get an aircraft of that size to comfortably and economically transport people internationally, it will take several years for that to happen.
Other question? Well, I have a couple of thoughts here. Just like to let people know, if they don't already, that 2023 was the hottest year on record. And let's see, what do I want to say about this? We really need, of course, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels as quickly and as completely as possible. So, what do you think about the subsidization of the fossil fuel industry? Is that diminishing? The International Monetary Fund estimated that in 2022, in the United States, we spent $762 billion subsidizing this industry that needs to be phased out. And the worldwide number was about 7 trillion. So we're not doing a great job. And we do have the technical know-how, we have the knowledge to be able to solve the problem of restoring our climate, but we do not have the political will. And so what I really want to ask the speakers is, how do we get more political will? What kinds of things can we do to make that happen? Because that seems to me to be perhaps the most fundamental part of this problem. Any thoughts about that?
Well, if you're going into politics, I feel like the best way to do it is just by being a part of what we stand for. I mean, we are a nation of the people, for the people, despite the representations that we seem to be under guide by. We are one in which we have one of the best governments in the world by theory, in the sense that we have control over what we say. So I guess even just a peaceful protest, even just getting the word out, saying something, is going to be one of the most efficient ways to help.
I also think that we need to emphasize collaboration and phase climate, like change the way that climate change is viewed, because right now it's viewed very much as a democratic issue. And I think if we emphasize the need that this is something that affects everyone, then that's really the only path to create change.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's interesting, but there was like a theme in all of your speeches that I noticed that was pretty much like, yes, this is a problem and it might not be for the individual to solve, like, let's vote for this bill, let's like hold the corporations accountable, let's think about big flight. Like, I'm thinking that almost all of these speakers, like 10 years ago, would have been like, I'm going to, like, I'm going to make this choice, I'm going to be a better recycler. And all these guys were like, this problem is huge, this is bigger than the individual. Like, how do we let the government hold bigger organizations accountable? That, I was really surprised that was almost a theme in every single one of them. Was like, we're now realizing that, we need somebody higher up the food chain to make these changes. Thought that was, did you guys get that impression? I thought that was like a theme you had going. Let's look high up, let's stop it there.
Well, I was just going to say, just to add to your question about subsidies, I mean, it's a huge part of, I don't know if it's the problem or the solution, but it's in the conversation for sure, I think unquestionably. The thing that I mean personally that I always come back to, I'm sure everyone, if you go buy groceries, you're just going to you're going to interact with this dilemma. It's inevitable. And as we're talking about it, I mean, I'm just reminded of how much of what we deal with is packaging and corporations and packaging. And I'm also reminded of what has happened. I'm in a generation, mid to late 40s, where I have half of my life without the internet, and then now half of my life with the internet. And that second half of the internet has brought upon the opportunity for us to purchase and buy anything with our phones and have it sent to our homes with an enormity of packaging,
yes.
Which is kind of ridiculous, right? You open something and say, take this box out, take this box out, take this plastic bag out. It's wild. But back to the point of subsidies in general, it's like not only is it an important part of the conversation, but how corporations have changed, how we are receiving packages, the extent to which we're receiving packages. It's a huge part of the conversation. So I don't have the answer on the subsidy piece, but it's not going away. It's a larger human dilemma because we're addicted to lots of things.
Yeah.
And if it's easy for us to get it, the click of a button, that's a recipe. So I'll stop talking, but it's a thing.
We're just going back to, go ahead.
Just leaving the topic for a moment. I was just really struck, I know Libby's the star of our girls basketball team, and Cooper's involved in National Honor Society and Student Council and speaks. The other three, I was impressed by all five of the poise you exhibited and your public speaking grace. Thank you. Could you just tell me, the other three I don't know, do you have public speaking experience?
I have a little bit. I've done some press conferences and things like that. I'm involved in Vermont Youth Lobby, and I've done some stuff for them. It's more recent public speaking, but I've done like a few events.
Oliver?
I acted throughout middle school, and I'm currently the Vermont State Debate Champion. So.
So same with the drama history, but on top of that, I took a public speaking class my freshman year, which introduced me into 3 different organizations in which I yearly do public speaking throughout.
All five of you, very impressive.
Speaking of Lily, she talked about speaking recently. She spoke as recently as last night. I heard her on VPR.
Oh,
And,
yay.
It's your press conference.
Yeah, I did an interview with Abigail Giles for VPR on the need to implement a climate policy and for people to take responsibility for their actions. And just like kind of what Libby was saying on how this really isn't our problem. We've inherited a destroyed world and it shouldn't be fully on us to fix it.
I heard you all say that. It was so fascinating.
We're just going back to this matter of trying to get on the climate problem. Libby mentioned Greta Thunberg, of course, this young Swedish woman who has done wonders in trying to get youth of the world to fight for climate change. She has the guts to stand up and excoriate world's leaders in public, which is pretty impressive. But I think it's also true, as Libby suggested, that she has limited influence. And this brings me to the fact that there's a lady in the audience here tonight who made a suggestion I thought was interesting. She suggested that Taylor Swift is arguably the most powerful woman in the world. She has this enormous fan base who are religious about her, they're worshipful of her. If Taylor got interested, really deeply interested in the climate change problem, I think her influence would quickly infect this wonderful fan base she had. And the result could be protests around the world and vast numbers of votes for potential leaders of the world who actually would be willing to stand up against all the pressures to maintain the status quo and act to save our environment. So this really moved me to do something that's quite quixotic. In fact, you can probably make fun of me, but I wrote a letter to her mom, Taylor Swift's mother, trying to get her to work on her daughter. You won't be surprised that I haven't gotten a response.
How did you get her address?
Yeah. Google does wonderful things.
Friend of the family.
Other questions? Oliver made a brief mention. Oh, go ahead.
There's some seniors among you. Do you have plans for next year?
Yes. I'm going to college. I'm going to study environmental science and environmental analysis, likely in the Netherlands.
Why the Netherlands, just out of curiosity?
The school I want to go to is the most sustainable university in the world. And they solely have environmental science programs, and they have a very strong focus on sustainability. And the Netherlands in general is an extremely sustainable country, and I really love the idea of going somewhere where people care about sustainability, and is the base of a ton of global sustainable solutions.
Other thoughts? Well, Oliver mentioned, just in passing, mentioned methane. So what about methane? Anybody want to comment about why it's relevant to what we're doing tonight?
Well, isn't agriculture a large part of Vermont's economy? With cows and sheep, large terrestrial mammals like that, they produce large amounts of methane and other harmful emissions to our atmosphere. So that's a really tough problem to tackle, especially for Vermonters.
And septic systems, right?
Right.
Septic systems. How many of us have septic systems?
Yeah.
I see methane pipes sticking out on Willie Hill.
But can methane be used?
Well, sure, yeah.
They've talked about
Methane
phase-
is essentially what
yeah.
natural gas is. But has anybody heard of methane sat? Methane sat, it's a satellite that was launched earlier this month. And it operates using infrared detection to locate methane plumes and LiDAR to determine location. And it's going to, it encircles the Earth 15 times a day. And it's going to be able to locate vast numbers of methane leaks. Our oil and gas industry has methane leaking all over the place in hundreds or thousands of their drill sites. And this new satellite is going to be able to pinpoint where those spots are, and so they can get closed up and maybe some fines associated too, I hope. But anyway, that's important progress. But most of the methane that's the problem is anthropogenic. It's our fault that it's there. It's because of the oil and gas industry on the one hand, and as Cooper mentioned, because of cattle and sheep burp and fart methane. Fortunately, for what it's worth, there's a red seaweed called Asparagus. It contains an enzyme that inhibits, it contains a substance that inhibits an enzyme in a cow's stomach. The enzyme is necessary for making methane. And so if a farmer has only 1% or a little less of this seaweed in the feed for the cattle, the amount of methane they emit is reduced to about 80%. So some farmers are doing that. Others, I guess, other plans in the works are developing devices that can sit inside a cow barn and destroy the methane that's in the air there. So that's a possibility of progress. But why? Why is methane such a problem? There's only 1/200th as much methane in the air as there is carbon dioxide. And there's only 0.04% carbon dioxide, so where is all methane? So why is it a problem? If you had equal amounts, equal weights of carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere, and you followed for 20 years what happened, you find that the emissions, or that the global warming that the methane caused would be 84 times as great as that of the CO2. In other words, it's just vastly more effective as a greenhouse gas than CO2 is. So that's why, even though the quantities are very small in the air, it's enough to cause a vast amount of damage, actually responsible for about 30% in this country of the global warming that's going on. Any other thoughts that people might have? Well, if not, how about thinking about population? Population is something that, in principle at least, human beings really have some control over, whether it happens in fact or not. But if we think about what the population was just before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when all the trouble started happening, the population was about 1/10 of what it is now. Now imagine that if the population had remained at that level up until the present time, with all the technological advance that we've enjoyed and with all the prosperity that we've enjoyed, how much global warming would have happened? It's estimated that that would have been about 13 parts per million rise in CO2 in the atmosphere. Instead, in fact, it's been 130 some parts per million. In other words, if we had a much smaller population, we'd have a much smaller problem. So, what about that? What should we be doing with respect to Earth's population and how?
I think that's a loaded question.
Sure.
I really do. I don't think it's kind of offensive in a way for me.
Offensive
Yeah,
question?
well, I'm a Catholic, and, you know, I think you're talking about birth control and other means of eliminating
Okay.
population. So,
Okay, well,
Well, it just seems like we can't have it all, right? We got a lot of people, we got a lot of people eating meat, we got a lot of cows. Like, at some point, we have to make some decisions about how we're gonna work as a society to reduce our dependencies for all of the people who we now have living on this planet.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know, it doesn't seem like we wanna make a lot of decisions about it. Seems really tricky. More people, more cows, more packaging, more. I don't know what's gonna finally tip the scales for us.
Don't know. Who got another question? Those judges are pretty slow.
I think they're having a tough decision to make back there.
That sounds like it.
That's what it's doing.
Wow. Well, okay, that obviously is not a topic that we want to get into. So we've got to choose a different one. What about direct air capture, DAC? This is a very appealing concept. You just remove carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere. And there now are a growing number of factories in various parts of the world, biggest ones in Iceland, doing just exactly that. For example, in the southern part of the United States, there are going to be 2 such factories being built soon. And I've read that each one is going to be capable of sequestering 1 million tons per year of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So you read that and you say, wow, 1 million tons. That's great, we can forget about this business of getting rid of fossil fuels. Problem is solved. The only trouble with that reasoning is that 1 million tons is approximately 1 millionth of the number of tons of CO2 that need to be removed if we want to restore the climate to what it used to be before the Industrial Revolution. And so direct air capture, though it's getting a lot of press these days, has very serious limitations. It's a great idea, but scaling it to the level would have to be scaled at is asking too much. So it can be a piece of the puzzle, but I think a small piece of the puzzle. It's interesting that I read that certain of these direct air capture factories that have been built, typically by oil companies, oil and gas companies. I should say that direct air capture is a very energy-intensive process. So it takes a lot of energy to operate these plants. Now, the giant one in Scotland, in Iceland, there's 2 of them there now. They use geothermal energy, and that's great. But some of the ones that oil companies have operated use fossil fuels to run the plant. And the emissions from the fossil fuel burning far exceed the CO2 that they're able to get out of the air. So I find this really hard to believe, but I think we shouldn't underestimate the cynicism of our oil and gas industry. Well, here we are, the judges are back.
Got the checks and the ribbons right here. We're ready to.
Not quite, not quite.
Not yet?
Yeah, I think the first thing we want to do is to thank all of our speakers and hand each of them a certificate that records that thanks. And so I'm doing this in the name of the Lions Club. And here's Oliver. These are not in any particular order. Cooper.
Thank you.
Wiley. Libby. Oh, there she is.
Thank you.
Really.
Pleasure. Get a little closer together and hold your fist. You can pretend to smile, you don't have to do it. That's great.
So thank you in the name of the Lions Club, and we very much appreciate all of the contributions that's been made. So we'll let you sit down now. And,
Okay, our third place winner is Oliver Benedict. You want to?
Can you hold?
Okay, hold on.
That's great. Thank you, Oliver.
Our second place winner for $150 is Riley Naylor. And our first place winner is Lily Terry. And that, I guess, concludes the evening.
Not quite, not quite.
Not quite, okay. Sorry.
The original plan here was for our first place winner to move on to the second level of the statewide contest that's scheduled for May 4th, 11 o'clock at the Fireside Inn and Suites in West Lebanon. It's a Vermont statewide contest, but it's being held there in New Hampshire. So that was the plan until yesterday, or maybe it was this morning. I learned that we've been invited by the state contest organizers to have both our first and second place speakers invited to the statewide contest, where they have a chance to win substantially fatter prizes than they got from us. So this event is going to happen on May 4th. That's a Saturday at 11 o'clock at the Fireside Inn and Suites in West Lebanon. Okay? So congratulations to our top two winners. And finally, I'd like to thank our judges once again for doing the heavy lifting for this affair. Gary and Stephen and Peter. But also Nico Becker, who's our financial guy. Glenn Britton, who's our timer. Kyle Kohler, who recorded the event and also helped in other ways. So that's it. Thank you folks for coming.